What's going on, good people? It's your boy Eric with another reaction video. Today I want to respond, or not respond to. I always say respond, but today I want to react to this young lady's video. Um, I didn't get her name, but I'll try to remember to link it in description box below. But anyway, she is her videos are pretty good. They're on point. She does a really good job, great job of explaining something in a short period of time. You can tell she's done the research. You can tell she has studied. You can tell she has um, gave everything she talked about. She has did some work in order to come to a conclusion. The reason why I want to respond to this video right here is because you know what? That's a long story, but I agree with what she's saying, and a lot of the stuff that she said are things that I have found out, not discovered because they happened, but I found out years ago, and these things shaped my mind, changed my mind, reshaped my mind in the way that I look at the world, history, um, current events, society, past events. They have really reframed my mindset. Um, I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot, and for many years I stayed quiet and didn't say nothing because I didn't want to not be considered black or ridiculed or talked about. Anyway, that's a different video in itself too. But let's get into her video because again, she's spitting facts. She's saying some good stuff, and um, I think people need to hear this stuff. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Hi, I'm Naisha, and I am on a mission to help you learn what they purposely left out of our American textbooks to keep us dumb and divided. Let's talk about slavery. Most of us are taught a very simplified story of slavery, right? On purpose. We're taught that white Europeans stole Africans, brought them to America, and the rest is, well, history. But the truth is far more complicated and nuanced, and the missing details would completely change how we see race and power in our country. Here are a few things that they tend to skip. Africans were selling other Africans in the trans-Saharan slave trade long before Europeans ever even showed up. In fact, over 50 million people remain enslaved worldwide today. Another critical point missing from most textbooks is that the first legal slave owner in America was a black man named Anthony Johnson. That's a real court case. Look it up.
I kind of want to pause it right there because that's one of the things that in my new journey that I found out that I didn't know. This was back in like 2008, 2007 ish, 2008. And the reason why, it's probably 2008. Because the reason why I did the deep dive is because into like history and so on and so forth, is because of Barack Obama becoming president. And when he became the president, I just felt so, empowered, and I wanted to learn more about history and more about politics when it came to that era, like doing racist, doing like Jim Crow and slavery and so on and so forth, man. And I end up hearing about this guy, Anthony Johnson, which was not what I was expecting. And I was surprised to find it out. In fact, it goes so much more deeper. Like a lot of people don't know that the slavery that we know today, the way it is today, is because of this black man who was also an African, who was also sold to white people, white Europeans. This was a black man who was sold to white Europeans, and he was sold to white Europeans by other Africans. And this black man was sold to white Europeans. And I know what, I'm not gonna go down that road. She even has a video about this guy. And like I say, she does a better job of doing. As you can see, I'm long winded, and so I will be trying to hit every detail, nuance that I can think of. So I'm gonna let her tell. I'm gonna do another reaction video with her talking about that. But yeah, this Anthony Johnson dude, that guy he's the pioneer of the slavery that we know today. Uh, Not only that, man. She mentioned Africans selling Africans. That was something that I didn't know. I kind of assumed what every other black person assumed, which was white people was running into the interiors of Africa and snatching up black people and throwing them on a ship. It was only then, back in that time, by 2008ish, whatever it was, that I found out that no, they were pulling up to the shores of Africa. Africans would meet them at the shore with slaves. They would sell them slaves from the shore because I've learned that it was like more white people died going to get slaves because of the sickness and illnesses than we think died. Like it was a pretty much that trip was not a great trip for white people. But either way it go, I'm not taking enough white people. Those people are evil people for sure. Don't condone it at all. But a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people think that white people ran into the interiors of Africa, held their muskets or whatever they had back then, and held them at gunpoint and shot and killed their families and snatched them up and got the strong ones and put them on. Like, no, they were sold to the white people by other Africans who were of a stronger tribe. So stronger tribes would run into Africa, find the weaker tribes, conquer them, invade them, snatch their men and their women, and then sell them. And she also mentioned that Africans were selling Africans long before Europeans even came. That's something else I found out back then. That the Arabs was buying Africans centuries before Europeans was. Centuries, like hundreds of years before Europeans have ever, before they even bought a slave, the Arabs were already buying slaves. And keep in mind, they was buying slaves all, even at that point in time. When the Europeans started to buy the slaves, they were still buying slaves, and they started centuries before the Europeans even first bought one slave. You see what I'm saying? And not only that, I've seen videos of how to this day, like they still enslaving Africans. They put an ad out in the paper or on the internet or something like that, and the Africans will respond to it for a different country, and they would go to their country thinking they have a job as like a housekeeper or a nanny or something like that. But then they get there into that country, and the people there would take their passport, hold them hostage, and won't let them leave. They stuck in their country, working for free as a slave. It's some videos out there. It's some videos out there, man. But I digress. I just want to kind of hit on a few things. As you can see, like I said, I'm long winded, so be patient with me. I'm learning this whole reaction YouTube stuff. So let's get back to it.
Another fact that rarely makes the cut is that the majority of white Americans never owned a single slave. Most were poor farmers, workers, or slaves themselves. A tiny percentage of wealthy elites controlled the system.
That's another thing I learned. And I'm back. No, but that is another thing I learned. What I read was during that time of slavery is either less than or only 2% of that population in the South owned slaves. Only 2%. Not every white person. In other words, the only people that owned slaves were rich white people. The other white people that was poor white people, like they kind of lived at a certain point in time. They kind of lived amongst the slaves, or they was, like she said, slaves themselves. Which, when I was researching that years ago, I'm not gonna lie. There's a lot I remember. A lot I don't remember. A lot of stuff is kind of fuzzy. But what I do remember, I remember. You know what I'm saying? If I'm fuzzy about it, I would say so. If I'm not, whatever. But that right there, when I learned that there was also white slaves, during that time when I was, looking this stuff up, I've learned about that's not learned about the Irish because I didn't know Irish people was mistreated, and a lot of people were saying that Irish peoples they weren't enslaved, they was indentured servants. That right there, that indentured service stuff, that's a topic. Like that's something that we need to talk about because that's something that we wasn't told. But anyway, they said the Irish people was indentured servant, they wasn't slaves like Africans, but no, they were slaves. They were white slaves there. So that's a lot to talk about with this stuff, man. Because again, it just wasn't black people that was just slaves back then. There was also white slaves too. And again, this one was probably I'm not sure about, but it's either less than 2% of the population in the South during that time owned slave, or about 2%. Again, so not all white people own slaves. This is the reason why this whole reparation talk is weird, because you got to figure out who owns slaves, whose ancestor owned slaves, and who is the slave. It's excuse me. The work that needs to be done there is crazy, and so we can't. This is the reason why people try to paint all white people as being a ancestor to a slave owner, when again it's not. Like literally some generations died off years ago. You know what I'm saying? Like that slave owner's ancestry is gone. There's no on this earth. So it's like, well, how are we gonna find out who they are? You know, every black person in America is not a product of slavery. That they don't that a background is not from slavery. Not every American. I'm trying to tell you again, less than or 2% own slaves, and there was rich white people, there were poor white people, there was middle class white people. The poor white people were mistreated. They was looked down upon in society, and some of them were slaves. A lot of them were slaves. And so that's something that they don't tell us. They don't tell you that white people was also slaves. They don't tell you about the poor white population. I learned about this stuff, and I learned about a lot of, even beyond slavery, poor whites and black people live together. You know what I'm saying? A book that I want to read that I keep hearing is a good book is a Thomas Sowell book. Oh man, I can't remember the name of, but Thomas Sowell wrote a book talking about that stuff. You know what I'm saying? And like how even the way black people talk, the slang we have, it's not black slang. It's poor white people talk. That's how they talk back then. Finna, all that type of stuff. That's poor white people talk, and that's where we got it from because that's who we grew up around when we was free people and so on and so forth. But anyway, I digress. Let me take it back about 5 seconds. If I can, I don't know if I can or not. I thought I could.
But today, every white person gets painted. A tiny percentage of wealthy elites controlled the system. But today, every white person gets painted with that brush. It all boils down to critical race theory, CRT. It gets a lot of headlines, but rarely any explanation. CRT takes that oversimplified version of history and it really runs with it. It says that racism isn't an evil of the individual. It is woven into every single system. So if you're white, you're automatically privileged. If you're black, you're automatically oppressed. No nuance, no context, no room for individual perspectives, experiences, or outcomes. Just permanent guilt on one side, permanent victimhood on the other.
And that's what I'm talking about. You see, how do we paint all white people as racist or descendants of racist people when only 2% or less than 2% own slaves? The mass majority of white people did not own slaves. You know what I'm saying? Now, if you want to talk about them being mistreated, so on and so forth, that's a different story. Because they were mistreated. But it's so much that we don't know. But if we're gonna say stuff like reparations because of slavery, because people they own slaves, that this is the reason why when it comes to politics, right? they every election season they bring a reparation, they bring a racism, and so on and so forth, like clockwork. Nowadays it don't work as much because white folks are starting. I mean, white folks, black folks are starting to wake up now and see it for what it is. It's just something to get the black votes. You look at your boy Newsom down there. This dude signed an executive order to create a panel or a what you want to call it, man? Create a either way go a panel of people, right? A focus group, whatever they were, for reparations. And these people's jobs is to see how can they distribute reparations and who gets it, so on and so forth. Everything this group, these people give Newsom, he vetoes it. He rejects it. Every single thing he gives them. You want to know why? Because what he want to do is he want to say, "Oh, look, I created a panel of people, or these people, so they can look into reparations." Black people would never get reparations. Why? Because for one main reason, you didn't go through the tragedy. You were not a slave, so you're not owed anything, so on and so forth. And so, for those who want to say, "Oh, well, they got the wealth and so on," again, 2% of white people own slaves. And a lot of those generations and a lot of those people, their descendants have died off. They don't even exist no more. This family name no longer exists. That wealth is gone. For those who are still here, whose descendants are, that wealth is gone. There may be, if, and I highly doubt it's a handful of people. That's probably less than a handful of people who still has wealth from back in those days. But that wealth is gone. It's gone. And so we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to act as if, the money from slavery is still around. And not only that, man, I like, again, I went down this deep rabbit hole with this stuff, man. And cotton wasn't like people, oh, they picked the cotton. Cotton was nothing. The revenue from cotton didn't do nothing for their GDP. It didn't build their country. It didn't build that, because remember, you had the North, you had the South. The percentage that the cotton fields made were astronomically. They didn't mean it. I'll put it this way: if back then they got rid of the cotton fields, it wouldn't have hurt their economy in no way, shape, or form. Did it add? It did, but it was such a small percentage of their total growth that it didn't really matter whether it was there or not. Now, tobacco and I forgot what the other stuff was. Tobacco, stuff like that, maybe a bit different, but cotton, because all we know is cotton. All we hear about was taught about in school was cotton, and that was it. But cotton was nothing. You know what I'm saying? Like those people, those cotton people, they didn't. The history has been definitely tweaked to make us emotional, and it doesn't give the full story, man. It's a lot of stuff missing. Let's get back to it.
But here's what they don't talk about. After slavery, freed Black Americans built thriving towns, schools, and businesses. Even during segregation and Jim Crow, they bought land, they held office, they built wealth from the ground up. They didn't wait for permission. They pushed forward. That story doesn't fit the CRT script, so it's left out. When you water down history, you keep people emotionally chained. But when you tell the whole truth, the good, the bad, and the inconvenient, you break those chains, because the truth does not divide us. It actually frees us.
So yeah, that's the video, man. That young lady is awesome. Now, CRT, I'm not gonna lie, I don't know much about CRT, but from what I do know, the little that I do know, it basically teaches white people bad, black people oppressed, white people needs to repay black people need special treatment, special attention. Now, again, I could be wrong, but I don't see how CRT is necessary. Look, end of the day, like she said, when black people were free, we were thriving. We wasn't. We was thriving. It got to a point to where we was outpacing white people when it comes to entrepreneurship, marriage, family, all we was outpacing white people at a certain point in time. All the way up, and this is during the 1920s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, all the way up into the 60s, which is when they started to implement the welfare programs aimed towards black people. Like, and keep in mind, this is the Democratic Party, right? Nobody disputes or nobody argues that the welfare state ruined the black community. It got the fathers out the household. Nobody argues that that's not true. But the question that I don't, well, not the question, but the thing I don't see nobody's talking about is who did that in this political season right now, in this time right now. Every cycle, man, I go through this, and I just don't understand it, man. We talk about how the welfare program, got black fathers out the home, and how the war on drugs locked up all this stuff, and all of these things was implemented by Democratic people. Politicians, Democratic politicians, but yet black folks steady vote for the Democratic politicians. I don't understand that, man. Republican, something else I didn't know when I started my studies back in 2008 was that when black people were freed and slavery was abolished, black people became Republicans. I didn't know that. The mass majority of black people were Republicans. They're Republicans. All the way up into the 60s is when all that started to change drastically. Because black people also fought for the Confederacy. But Booker T. Washington, Republican. These people were Republicans. And nobody talks about that. Something I always tell my wife is, because during that time, Booker T. Washington, Malcolm X, oh man, is another guy. I can't think of who it is, bro. My memory is terrible. But it was three guys that stood out to me. And I was like, everything these people were saying is true. Everything that they said was going to happen if the Negro continued to follow, all the white liberal for the most part, it's true. It has came true. Malcolm X, controversial figure. I'm not with all the militant stuff and so on and so forth. But he was right in saying that the white liberal was the worst enemy. He didn't even oppose white people in general, just the white liberals. You know what I'm saying? Because he saw what they were doing. Keep in mind, he lived during a time where black people was prospering. You know what I'm saying? Where they was decent at. And then here comes Lyndon B. Johnson, who was quoted to say, and I'm going to have these, you probably can't say it on YouTube. Lyndon B. Johnson quoted and said, I'm going to have these hard R's voting Democrat for the next 200 years. And then he started dropping all these welfare programs. Like, it's a lot going on, bro, in history. And some of this stuff I'm saying is well known, people know, but it's like they don't care. You know what's weird? A lot of people say, well, a lot of people don't support nothing that has anything to do with racism, right? If it's a business, we want to cancel it because the owner supported a racist man 10 years ago. Or if it's a person who is running for election, he was, friends with a racist person 30 years ago. We want to cancel them. The Democratic Party roots is in racism. The Democratic Party is a party that fought to keep slavery, to keep Jim Crow, to keep segregation. They fought against The Civil Rights Bill, 90%, all of the Civil Rights Bill has been created or put into place or signed into law by Republicans, not Democrats. The Republican Party was literally formed and put together to abolish and end slavery. That was the whole point of the Republican Party even starting. But people don't know that stuff. The Democrats, the KKK, is the party of the Democrats. The Democrats is the party of the KKK. The Democrats are the ones who literally started and formed the KKK. They don't tell you about how the KKK was beating up and hurting white and black people for voting for Republicans. They would go and intimidate white and black people or hurt them or to keep them from voting Republican. And they forced people to vote Democrat. The KKK was formed and created by the Democratic Party. And everybody said that was this big switch, right? Because again, as I'm researching this stuff, you hear about a big switch, right? Where the Democratic Party switched from being the party of racists and hatefulness and bigotry to the party of pro-black, right? And so I'm trying to find, and to this day, I cannot find what that switch looked like. What was the switch and what did that switch look like? I can't find it. Only thing that I can find is that there were two Democrats, like senators or something like that, who switched parties. That was it. Out of all the Democrats, only two of them switched and became Republicans. That ain't no switch. Like, that's all I could find. That's all I could find. I'm trying to understand where the switch come in at. And on the more strategic note, if you are a part of the minority, now the Republicans came down, right? Let me just explain what I mean. The Republicans came down from the North, fought against the South to free the slave, abolish slavery, amongst some other stuff. They freed the slaves. Bam, slaves are free. Slaves began to go to the North and began to be prosperous, so on and so forth, whatever. Slaves become Republicans, they're free now, so on and so forth, right? At what point did the Democrat Party say, you know what, that's a different video. I'm not gonna go, that's a different video. But like I'm saying, man, she's on point. A lot of the stuff she's saying is stuff that I've read, is stuff that I've seen as far as videos go, from historians and so on and so forth. And we're not taught this stuff. We're not told this stuff. This stuff is held back from us. And there are going to be people out here that's going to say, oh, that doesn't matter. Slavery still happened. It's true. And it was horrible. It was horrific. It really was. But a lot of stuff that we was taught and told didn't happen that way. And it literally changes a lot of things. It doesn't change the fact that slavery was a horrible, horrific thing. It doesn't change the fact that they hung people, they beat people, they bred people like they was cattle. It doesn't change that fact. That's still horrible and horrific things that I condemn wholeheartedly, 1,000%. But it wasn't on the scale that we thought it was. It wasn't every white person in the South owned a slave. It wasn't the mass majority of white people in the South owned slaves. It wasn't what we thought it was. It wasn't white folks running into Africa, stealing black people and forcing them on a ship. It wasn't this Anthony Johnson person. This dude was a slave. But not a slave, I'm sorry. He was an indentured servant. When they sold Anthony Johnson to the white Europeans, the white Europeans bought him as an indentured servant. Anthony Johnson worked his term, which was probably 7 years. It's probably based off the Bible. He worked 7 years. And when Anthony Johnson worked his indentured servitude term, he was freed. This is before the translated slave trade even started. Anthony Johnson was sold as a slave to a white European. He worked as a indentured servant, worked his term, and he was freed. Anthony Johnson went on to buy property, and this dude is, like I said, it's a different video, but he is the reason why. But we not told that type of stuff. We're told that white people did it. White people did it. Anyway, that's my video, man. I can go on and on about it. I'm pretty sure the video is long as crap, but it's just a snippet, man, and my reaction to the video. There's a lot of stuff in history we need to find out. We need to know. Black people, man, wake up. I'm not saying we need to forget about slavery. I'm not saying that we need to erase history, but we need correct history. We need the whole history, not the fake history. And trust me, this whole slavery narrative, a lot of it has been exaggerated, and a lot of it has been made up. I mean, if you think roots was a real thing, something's wrong. So, talk to you guys later. Peace.